Thank you very much. We are about to start the second half of our concert. And as I mentioned earlier, this part would be the texts of Marti set to music by incredible number of talented musicians. We will start, as I mentioned, with the unique song El Proscripto, which Marti wrote at the express request of the Tampa cigar worker. And then we will have a treat for you, something very unique. One of the signature pieces of Marti was the story La Niña de Guatemala, which I'm sure most of the audience knows. La Niña de Guatemala has been musicalized by last count, 29 different composers. Alonso, Alvarado, Ardébol, Bernardo. José Raúl Bernardo was a very talented Cuban who lived in the United States for many years. He died a few years ago, and he wrote an opera called The Child, based on La Niña de Guatemala, which had its premiere in New York in 1974. We have Diego, who was an important writer for children's music in Cuba. Nugué was a composer who wrote the music for a Cuban ballet on La Niña de Guatemala. We had Sanchez de Fuentes, Villalón. I mean, it's a huge list. From that magnificent list, we've chosen 3 pieces, which you will hear one after the other. One is a piece by Sanchez de Fuentes, inspired in the art of the German leader. Then we have Ernesto Lecuona in a waltz. And finally, we have Joaquín Ninculmel in an incredibly tragic piece. The beauty of listening to the 3 together is that we can appreciate how a genius like Marti spoke to everybody in a different language. And by reading Marti, you take what you take, and every proposition is as valid as the next. It's a beautiful sequence, and you'll be able to compare how one single text can bring about so much brilliance. And we will also, as I mentioned, have Y te busqué by Armando Tranquilino. And finally, we will have probably the most famous Cuban song of all times, which happens to have, in a twisted story, the lyrics of Marti, and that's the Guantanamera. I don't know how many of you know this story, which is a little complicated. But the Guantanamera was born in Cuba in the 1920s by a very famous musician called Joseito Fernandez. And Joseito wrote a slightly different version of the music we have come to know. And that music was played in the radio, announcing the Crónica Roja, all the events of the day, and that's how we would come to listen to La Guantanamera in Cuba. And then another musician, very famous musician, son of another famous musician, Orbón, Julián Orbón, born in Avilés, Spain, to Cuba, very young. When he was in New York, he thought of the idea of adding the verses of Martí to La Guantanamera, which was not originally the intention of Joseito Fernandez. And he thought of that idea of putting the 2 together, and in order to do that, to accommodate the length of Martí's verses, he had to change the music somewhat. And then he was doing that in New York, and another Cuban composer, Héctor Angulo, heard Orbón in that combination of Martí and Guantanamera, and thought it was a very interesting combination. And Angulo was hired in a summer camp in New York to teach the kids in a choir. And he thought it was a good idea to teach the kids the Guantanamera of Orbón, who in turn took it from Joseito. And as things happen, because that's the way history works in many, many occasions, Pete Seeger walked in the summer camp in New York when they were rehearsing La Guantanamera. And he was so enthralled by the combination that he took it to Carnegie Hall. And that's the story of how a Cuban song, and the name of Guantanamera is very interesting because Joseito tells it in his autobiography. He didn't have a name at the beginning. He would go to Villa Clara and would say, Villa Clareña, Guajira, Villa Clareña, and move on to Camagüey, and it's Camagüeyana, Guajira, Camagüey, pleasing everybody. And then he had a girlfriend from Guantanamo, who according to him would bring food to him at when he was rehearsing, and would bring vista en cazuela or something like that. And they broke up, and he was very upset. Not only, I'm sure, that the girlfriend was gone, but the food was gone too. So one day he went into the radio and decided to woo the girl back and said, Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera. And according to him, she showed up at the station with a flan de caramelo. So, with that note, we again applaud the magnificent group that's playing for us.